confused. What do we do now?
We're live. We're live.
Okay.
Seth, we're good to go.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm a little bit not used to doing these things, doing AMAs, but hello, Ido. Great to be with you here this evening to talk about the Saga cryptocurrency, what's going on with blockchain, and obviously the macro environment with monetary and fiscal policy around the world is certainly an interesting time, especially as it relates to cryptocurrency, which by its nature has lots of interesting properties that make it a different type of asset class when central banks and central government and governments take very unusual steps. So I want to just briefly about myself. I'm Seth. I'm COO of Liquid Group. Here based, I'm in Tokyo, Japan. And Ido, if you could please introduce yourself.
Yeah, first, thank you for having me, Seth, and thank you for the Liquid team. My name is Ido Sadeh. I'm the founder and chairman of Saga, which is a UK company. I'm based in Tel Aviv, and I'm speaking to you now from Tel Aviv. So Great. Quite far apart.
But we're all brought together by technology, thank goodness. So
definitely.
Before we get into the story of Saga, I'd like to get into the story of yourself, Ido. How did you first start getting into blockchain? When was the first time you actually acquired some Bitcoin?
So I had quite an eclectic journey. I started my professional life as a jazz musician in Paris. And in the past 15 years, am part of the Israeli startup scene, leading product organizations and startup companies. I think the first Bitcoin I acquired was somewhere in 2013 or 14, but it was quite dilettante, right? I acquired it because it seemed cool. I didn't really get into the depth of what blockchain really is or what Bitcoin really is. It was in 2017 that I was about to leave this entire industry and go back to the academia to study political science. And I was at the time part of a VC, an early stage VC. And I suggested that while I phase out from boards, etc., I should probably take an analyst with me and write a sort of playbook or investment thesis for the VC in blockchain. And this is how I really came to know this technology intimately, which obviously led to my decision not to go and study political science, but actually to partake in reshaping it, as I believe that blockchain is a highly political technology. And I believe I'm here to stay for the next 20 or 30 years.
Great. And do you still have those first Bitcoins? Just curious.
Yes, of course.
Okay, wonderful. So I think we've had Saga on Liquid. It started getting listed towards the end of last year, if I'm not mistaken. Right. And for those who aren't familiar with the token and its properties, could you just kind of give us a quick overview?
Sure, pleasure. So yes, we've just launched Saga on December 2019. After 2.5 years of development and regulation, etc. And indeed, we are listed on Liquid ever since. Saga's vision is eventually to become a global complementary currency. Complementary in the sense that we believe that national currencies, some of them are being very well managed, some of them less so, but either way, they are designed to meet the needs of a national economy. And we are meeting, and I think that the COVID-19, I'm sure that we'll discuss it furthermore, is accentuating the fact that we are a part of a global reality that transcends borders, and this is true to our economy as well. But up until now, we still do not have a global currency to serve this economic reality, to serve the fact that if you are a British citizen and you hold pounds, and the previous 3 years the pound has lost several, nearly 25% of its value in view of Brexit, when you interact within the British economy, you're actually fine because it reacts to the same Brexit. But when you go and buy on Amazon, you've lost 25% of your purchasing power. This is what Saga is designed to deal with. Obviously, our inspiration was Bitcoin as the first non-governmental currency contender, but we've identified several pitfalls that we believe are preventing Bitcoin from being, it may be serve as for many other purposes, but to be a real currency, a real medium of exchange, volatility needs to be controlled. That's the first issue. And the second issue we believe is crucial is the governance structure, to allow that eventually the holders of the currency are the sovereigns of the currency. And so to resolve the first issue of volatility, we've built a model whereby Saga starts as a stable coin on the SDR, on a basket of currencies, fully pegged to a basket of currencies, and only as it grows, as holders are voting more confidence by creating more Saga, does it start to very slowly depart from the reserve, so that the reserve is a sort of crutches to keep from volatility in the early days of Saga.
Got it. And you mentioned the governance part of it. I guess sort of the close relative to governance is transparency. So that's one of the first questions I think about when I evaluate stablecoins is the degree of transparency. So what are some of the tools available for potential users or investors to get an idea of either the fiat or the crypto that's backing the value of Saga?
Sure. So I think that that's true to any stable coin. If you want to evaluate or a reserve-backed coin, currency or coin, you want to assert mainly two elements. One is how much money is there really in reserve, and the second one is how much is this reserve legally committed to redeem the currency. And then there is a third element of how easy it is to redeem the currency. So in the first for the first question, how much money is in reserve, I believe we're setting an industry standard by allowing people to closely look at our website on a daily basis at attestations that the banks that are holding the reserve are actually signing. So no one has to trust us as to how much money we're holding in reserve. The banks are the ones that are attesting it, and they're doing so on a daily basis, so that there is no need to wait for an annual financial statement. So that's the first one. The second one, how committed is this money to redeem the reserve, is answered by our interim constitution. The reserve is pledged to redeem the currency, and there's nothing else that can be done with it. And anyone wishing to buy Saga or sell Saga or redeem Saga can do it directly through the smart contract from Ether and to Ether. So this question is answered as well.
Wonderful. So how do you expect, or what is the pathway where you think the willingness of investors or those worried about inflation, what mechanisms or triggers do you think will spur greater adoption and increase of wallet holders of the Saga token?
So I think it very much depends on the various target markets, if you want, or types of usage. And we're seeing two main types of usage currently and adoption. One is in countries where the local economy is struggling or the local currency is struggling. So countries the like of Argentina and Brazil and Turkey and South Africa, where Brazil in the last few months lost 24% of its value against the dollar, of the value of the real.
Yeah.
The ASR, the Argentinian peso, lost about 70% of its value in the last 3 years. The Turkish lira just hit a new low a bit short of a month ago. And in those countries, people are looking for a store of value that would store their value. And they are not able to do it with their local currencies. This comes also with capital flow restrictions. So an Argentinian, for example, can only hold $200 a year in his bank account. But cryptocurrencies can be held. So this is definitely a market, and we were especially designed for it because our backing is not in a single currency. We're not backed by the dollar. We're backed by the SDR, which is a basket of currencies determined by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and it is being used for 50 years by central banks to keep their reserve, so that if one currency exchange rate fluctuate, the others would offset losses. And so this is definitely a target market.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of thoughts there, and we'll turn to the questions that we've received on various social media shortly. But, you know, from our perspective at Liquid, we operate as a global business, and we're seeing very much what you've articulated, which is people in countries where the local currency has depreciated or greatly versus the dollar or gold. That's where we're seeing the most signups join onto Liquid. So we've seen a huge number of people sign up from South America, and we don't even have a Spanish localization on Liquid, but at the rate we're going, we're going to have to do that. Yeah, it's in some sense the growth of the monetary supply has been maybe the best thing that could have happened to crypto, right? I mean, crypto at some point dropped down precipitously in March, but as we look back on it now, that was sort of a false signal of what real investor demand and what end use demand of crypto might actually be. And I have to be an optimist working at an exchange, but I think some of these trends are really working in favor. But back to, you know, Saga, as I looked at and studied the Saga framework and compared it to some of the other stablecoins out there, one of the things that really struck me was that because you're tied to the SDR, you've eliminated another risk. We've talked about the transparency of attestations from banks, smart contracts on the blockchain, but you've also dealt with non-systemic risk of a particular currency, even if it's an effective stablecoin that's audited. I think what you've really achieved here is a much greater protection against inflation risks by using the basket as your index rate for the store of value. And that's something that's really, really interesting, and a very interesting choice that you guys have made that you know, I think will be very interesting for a lot of different investors.
I definitely agree. I think that the last few days are demonstrating. You've mentioned the crypto market taking a plunge at the beginning of the crisis, and that being a false indicator. But the correlated false indicator is that the dollar remains stable, although trillions of dollars have been printed, and although there were all the reasons for the dollar value to take a plunge as well, but this is changing in the last few days. And the SDR is exactly the mechanism to diversify and to offset the value, the loss of value from any specific currency. And, you know, I think it's not true only for crypto. At any time when there is a crisis and inherent instability between the leading currencies, we're seeing the SDR refloating. And then when all is well, it sinks back and no one uses it, except for central banks. But we're definitely expecting a year of instability, and this would be reflected in the exchange rate of currencies. And I think that regardless of Saga and the SDR, whoever seeks stability will find it in diversification and not in holding all the eggs in one basket.
Sure. So I had a question from a participant via Twitter based in Singapore. What type of use cases do you see for SGA in everyday life? Do you see it as something more than a store of value? And how do you think it'll perform in a depression? So there's actually a few questions in there.
Right. So I'll start with the first one. Obviously, a currency had three functions of being a store of value and a medium of exchange and a unit of account. But the last two functions are subject to a network effect, which SGA does not yet have. I don't think that any cryptocurrency, even Bitcoin leading the run, still does not have the network effect allowing it to become a medium of exchange, let alone a unit of account. We're still not, unless living in Venezuela, we're still not pricing our goods with how much they're worth in Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So eventually Saga is designed to be all three, but I think that the immediate value we can offer is definitely the value of being a trustworthy store of value, offsetting the risk of single currencies and mm-hmm. offering this stability. The question of depression, so the Saga monetary model is sitting between stablecoin and Bitcoin, if you want, in the approach, by the fact that it is fully correlated to the basket at first, but it loses the correlation as the currency grows. And when the currency shrink in a case of depression, then the reserve ratio goes back up. So it's a sort of a bonding curve that is only dependent on one thing, which is the size of the economy and the vote of confidence from the market. Along with counter-cyclical mechanisms that are aimed to prevent run on the banks, etc., or run on the Saga, I think that Saga is well geared to face a depression and to keep the stability of money even in hard times. And this is obviously relative to other solutions.
Sure. And I think some of these problems about scalability are not even specific to any particular token. It's more about blockchain as a technology. Again, I just sharing from my experience, helping to operate the Liquid exchange, what we've seen on the Bitcoin, for example, is a massive spike in mining fees for sending transactions onto the network. It's got to the point over the past few weeks that, when I first got into Bitcoin, I was fascinated with the idea of transference of value without any intermediaries very quickly for large amounts. But nowadays, if you think about buying a cup of coffee with a Bitcoin, problem is, even if the coffee costs $3, you're going to pay $10 because you have to pay $7 in transaction fees. So there's still a lot of technical issues that need to be worked out. But I think people in general, if they're betting against technology, they're probably going to lose most of the time, right? So I think these problems will be solved.
And I think that the true value of blockchain is in decentralizing the decision-making mechanism. Very relevant to what we're seeing now, decentralizing the ability to print money or negating this ability to print money. Mm-hmm. And I think that we'll find many complementary solutions, whether it's a Lightning network in the case of Bitcoin or other protocols to facilitate the payment, not necessarily on the blockchain, which has its inherent scalability limitations and efficiency limitations.
So I have a question here about vision and maybe as your role as founder. What do you believe will help us bring about fully digitalized banking and sort of the end of brick and mortar banks? And is crypto helping to popularize the idea of touchless money? And where does Saga play in this trend for more digitalization?
So what I'm going to say here might be unpopular, but I believe that the digitalization of money and cryptocurrencies or blockchain-based currencies are two separate things. The reality of it is that most of our money is already digital, and that there is no technological barrier in digitizing our banking system, but rather barriers of incentives, interest, and human paradigms. I don't think, I think that those are two neighbored solutions, but they're not the same. They're not the same thing. I think that the true essence of crypto is in providing an alternative financial system, is in providing an alternative design for the money itself, and not necessarily in dissolving the brick and mortar banking system. I think that this is by and large the role of the fintech ecosystem altogether, but not necessarily the cryptocurrency side of things. We at Saga are focused not at modernizing banking, but at modernizing the base value of money and making sure that we are controlling the value of the money that we're using, and that we're not diluted on the way, and that we can easily transfer it across borders, regardless of the country we live in or are the citizens of.
So I have a question for you. This is my own question. You know,
are you participating in the draw?
I am a participant. So when I speak with people in my teams at Liquid, one of the questions I'd like to understand is, what are the biggest barriers that they're facing and their obstacles for them to achieve their particular vision or goal? So for Saga, what are some of the biggest obstacles that you guys are focused on to help grow the ecosystem?
So I think that by far the biggest obstacle is education. And it's whether it's educating retail customers or users, or regulators or institutional users. I think we all were born to the fact that money is issued by states and by central banks, and in a very particular way. We mostly don't understand how our money works. And so it is an extremely hard task to explain why is our monetary system broken, need to be fixed, and how it needs to be fixed, when these are questions we're mostly not dealing with on our day-to-day life. Unfortunately for us as citizens, I think that this is going to be easier now to explain, because the system is breaking, and it's breaking faster. I'm saying unfortunately, although for the cryptocurrency ecosystem, it's probably good news, but we're also citizens of this world, and we will face, like everyone else, the backlash of a financial system that is breaking. So I think this is the biggest obstacle. The second obstacle is an obstacle of user experience, I think that it is far time for us to spend a lot of efforts in placing blockchain under the hood and providing a user experience that at least does not fall from the one that people are used to. If anyone is to create a payment solution, it needs to be at least as good as Venmo if we want anyone to migrate from Venmo to it. So I think that this is a second challenge. The third one is regulatory clarity. So Saga, for example, is not available in the US because the regulatory framework in the US is extremely unclear. We've seen the backlash after the issuance of the Libra first white paper. We've seen what happened to Telegram, and I think that this is extremely and definitely a major barrier to have regulatory clarity. The situation is in Europe and in Asia is much better in this regards. There are clear guidelines by which we abide obviously.
Yeah, I really concur. I think our team has been laser focused on the user experience, and as you quite elegantly put, making blockchain something that's underneath the hood. And I think the industry, blockchain also needs to figure out, because these assets are a new type of asset where they're non-custodial by nature, it's figuring out a way for people to be able to hold these assets without them being easily stolen or easily lost, right? And so those are the challenges that I think a lot of people are facing. We also, I think at Liquid, are thinking about how do we spread adoption and utility. Crypto, even today, is still largely a domain of traders and speculators, but we're right at the precipice of an age, really, in the technology where people actually see it as a way to better hold value, like such as Saga, or a better way to pay for things, to buy the coffee. And maybe Bitcoin isn't exactly that particular solution, but there's other solutions that are out there. And from our standpoint, we're spending a lot of our development resources and working with partners globally to make it very easy for people to acquire or sell their Bitcoin from one to another. So we're really excited. And like I said, some of our biggest interest is coming from South America. So I see these trends, the same thing that you're seeing, and it gives us a lot of hope for our industry and for this technology that adoption is going to pick up.
And I think that you've mentioned South America, and I think that one thing to note is that the narrative there is completely different when it comes to crypto. It is not about ideology and philosophy or speculation. It is about the fact that if I'm flying abroad and I can't take more than $200 with me, then having a stable coin or having Bitcoin that I can spend abroad is giving me utility. I don't have to take a boat from Buenos Aires to Montevideo to exchange my pesos for dollars and carry them with me on the airplane. I have a better solution. So it's really this utility narrative that I think is sorely missing in our industry, and that's why we so much enjoy working with those markets.
Absolutely. And I was thinking about, you mentioned the education front. Obviously, people in developed markets in Israel and Japan, myself, have a different sort of experience versus people in emerging markets where the currency is less stable. And I'm wondering if education, I don't want to say scare tactics, but maybe on the website showing videos of what happened in Germany in the 1920s or what's happening in Venezuela in 2020, or even just graphs of what's happened to the Argentinian peso. If that is another way to educate people, obviously we don't want to scare people, but just giving them a full picture of what can happen. So
we're trying to do all of that in a mild and non-scary way. It is still what we're seeing from the data is that until things are really happening or starting to happen, people are reluctant to believe, especially in developed countries, that their currency is not stable. And again, we're seeing, usually the developing world is looking towards the developed world to learn. And I think that here we can do the opposite and look towards those countries where instability already happened and have taken a toll on people's livelihood. Because I'm afraid that we might be in a similar position rather sooner than later.
So some of the questions here about liquidity. What is the current market cap of Saga, and where do you sort of your target for the overall number of wallet holders or market cap of the token, let's say in the next 6 months?
Well, I personally am less concerned about market cap targets and more about usage targets. So the market cap, we just very recently launched. The market cap of Saga currently is $2 million, around $2 million, and it's going up and down. To give you an example, we have a collaboration with Celsius where people can deposit their Saga and earn interest rate on Saga. And there, what Celsius would do at some cases would be to sell Saga to be able to lend it and create those interest rates. And so it's not reflected in the market cap necessarily or reflected in short cycles, but it does reflect utility of people being able to combine SGA's stability with the ability to earn yield on their deposit. And this is far more interesting to me than what would be the market cap. You know, Saga is not a call for speculators because the value of Saga increases very, very slowly because of the reserve. When you want to mitigate volatility, there's no way to mitigate it on the downturn without mitigating the growth of the currency. So the upside. So to some extent, Saga is designed to develop slowly, but in a way that is sustainable and preserves people value. So these are the metrics that we're monitoring more than market cap. I would add one last point, which is that the Saga model ensures constant liquidity in the sense that Saga is created only against money deposited in reserve in the form of sending Ether to the contract. No one can create Saga apart from any future holder sending Ether to the contract and by that creating Saga. And and vice versa. Anyone sending their Saga to the contract will receive the Ether worth of SDR instead. And so liquidity is not something that worries us, as the contract is designed to act as a market maker of its own.
Wonderful. How have you, in terms of redemption and issuance, is it to the point now where someone like my mom could do it? And I hope my mom's not listening, but for say a non-technical person.
I'm using my mom for these examples constantly, and I got caught one time. So yes, the onboarding process, all you have to do to be able to buy or sell Saga to the contract directly is to onboard on our website and to undergo a KYC and AML process. It is risk-based, so depending on the amount of trade, the questionnaire becomes less or more intrusive. And again, it is all designed to comply with European and UK regulation. We're fully AML compliant under the AML 5th directive. But it's a fairly easy process. Uploading a passport, especially in the low tiers, it's a process that takes about 1 minute. And unlike many other alternatives, it is not only for financial intermediaries or institutions, it is really for anyone wishing to be able to buy or redeem directly from the contract is able to do so.
Wonderful, wonderful, great. You know, I think we've covered a lot. I think we've covered pretty much all the questions. Maybe I didn't attribute it to the people on different social media. Apologies about that, but want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing about the project. And I'd really like to try to actually redeem or get some Saga issued myself. And I'm going to try it after this call.
Thank you very much for having me. I believe we have a winner for the draw, right? Would you like to announce it?
We do.
Here on live, or would you prefer to announce it offline?
We actually know we should announce it right here. And actually, I didn't cover her question, so let's actually cover it. It's actually very good. We covered tangentially, but you know, the winner is Julia White. I'm assuming it's a she, and her question is again. Congratulations, Julia. In the current, and I'll just read off her question, which I think, you know, we did touch on, but in the current situation of coronavirus disease, the global economy is very volatile. So what do you think about the prospects of cryptocurrency market in the future?
I think that what COVID shows us mostly is that we are dealing with global problems and challenges, but that the bodies that are dealing with it currently are mostly nations. and not necessarily very well coordinated between them in dealing with global challenges. And this is true for health issues and climate issues, but it is also true for our financial reality and monetary reality. And I think that cryptocurrencies have this huge advantage of not being tied to a single state, and yet through blockchain allowing governance and sovereignty of people regardless of their location. And so I definitely think that if crypto, that crypto can be an answer to some of the challenges that we're experiencing in this crisis. I really hope that we're mature enough and responsible enough to be able to serve as an alternative and to serve as part of the remedy to the crisis that we're all experiencing. I definitely believe so.
Great. Okay. Congratulations, Julia, for the question. Great answer.
Congrats.
Ido, hopefully we'll, I traveled to, I think just maybe one last point, I wanted to hear your thoughts on how is the blockchain community in Israel developing?
So obviously a lot of the community dispersed and disappeared in the crypto winter. Like I think it was the case all over the world. And I don't think it's necessarily bad, because a lot of noise disappeared in this winter. A lot of opportunistic intentions ran away as soon as the opportunity was not there. What we're seeing now is the core of blockchain development. I think that the community is doing fairly well. There's a good contact and relation between academia in Israel, whether it's computer science, but we're seeing more and more social sciences get involved with the blockchain community as well, which I think is very important. And it is doing fairly well. When it comes to Israeli regulation, I believe that we have much more to do. Israel is quite a conservative market that is not usually, when it comes to the regulation, not a first mover. But we're working on that as well.
Wonderful. Again, thanks very much, Ido. It was a pleasure, and well, I'm sure we'll be in touch, and I'll let you know when I acquire my Saga by sending out some Ethereum.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Cheers.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.